While doctors healed bodies, one man with a mop was secretly healing souls, and Ellen DeGeneres was about to meet the most important person in the hospital. The Ellen DeGeneres Show was radiating its signature warmth at the Warner Brothers studio in Burbank, with Ellen stepping onto the stage in her classic white button-down and navy blazer, her infectious energy immediately lighting up the space. The audience of 300 rose to their feet in enthusiastic applause, their excitement filling the familiar studio decorated with its iconic blue sky backdrop, fluffy white clouds, and swaying palm trees. The famous white chairs with their sleek black wooden legs sat ready for another afternoon of inspiring human connection. "Welcome back, everybody," Ellen called out, as the opening music faded, her voice carrying that perfect blend of joy and genuine warmth that had made her show a daily source of hope for millions of viewers worldwide. Today, I want to share a story with you about someone who works in a place where healing happens every day. But this person isn't a doctor or a nurse. He doesn't have a medical degree or fancy equipment. What he has is something much more powerful, a heart that sees every person as family and hands that do so much more than just clean. The studio buzzed with anticipation as camera operators positioned themselves and the production team prepared for what they sensed would be another emotionally powerful segment. It was Friday afternoon, and the energy in the studio reflected the culmination of another week of celebrating the extraordinary in the ordinary. In the green room, 52-year-old Thomas Williams sat quietly, his calloused hands folded over a worn manila envelope that contained 2 decades of memories. Thomas worked the night shift as a janitor at St. Mary's Children's Hospital in Phoenix, Arizona, and he had been doing the same job for 20 years. But what made Thomas extraordinary wasn't the length of his service. It was what he had turned that service into, transforming his role from building maintenance into something that resembled ministry. Thomas had started working at St. Mary's when he was 32 years old after losing his construction job. It was supposed to be temporary employment while he looked for something better. But 20 years later, Thomas couldn't imagine working anywhere else because he had discovered that his real calling wasn't cleaning floors. It was cleaning away fear and despair from the hearts of patients and families. Working the night shift from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., Thomas had access to parts of the hospital experience that day shift workers rarely saw. He witnessed the quiet moments when families kept vigil beside sick children, the times when patients lay awake feeling scared and alone, the hours when families waited in corridors praying for miracles. What had started as simple conversations, a greeting here, a kind word there, had gradually evolved into something much more profound. Thomas had become the unofficial chaplain, counselor, and grandfather figure to everyone who crossed his path during those late-night hours. He knew every patient by name, remembered their diagnoses, celebrated their progress, and mourned their setbacks as if they were his own family. Thomas's rounds weren't just about mopping floors and emptying trash cans. He had developed a system of care that went far beyond his job description. He knew which rooms contained children who were afraid of the dark, and he would linger there, telling quiet stories until they fell asleep. He recognized which parents hadn't left their child's bedside in days, and he would bring them coffee and listen as they shared their fears. The teenage patients especially gravitated toward Thomas. Young people facing cancer treatments, surgical procedures, or long-term illnesses found in him someone who didn't talk down to them, who didn't treat them like their diagnosis defined them. Thomas had an uncanny ability to sense when someone needed to talk, when someone needed to cry, or when someone just needed human presence during the darkest hours. But Thomas's impact extended beyond individual patient interactions. He had quietly become the emotional backbone of the entire night shift staff. Nurses dealing with difficult cases would seek him out, knowing that his calm presence could help them process the emotional weight of their work. Doctors making difficult decisions would find themselves talking with Thomas, whose decades of experience had given him insights that medical school couldn't teach. What the hospital administration had recently discovered was the true scope of his influence. A routine patient satisfaction survey had revealed something unprecedented. Patients consistently rated their night shift experience significantly higher than their day shift experience, despite receiving the same medical care. When administrators investigated further, they found that nearly every positive comment mentioned the kind man who cleaned our room but made us feel like family. The revelation had prompted Dr. Sarah Martinez, the hospital's chief of staff, to investigate what she privately began calling the Thomas effect. What she discovered was extraordinary. Patient recovery times were measurably shorter on floors where Thomas worked most frequently. Family stress levels were lower, staff morale was higher. Dr. Martinez had begun following Thomas on his rounds, observing his interactions with patients and families. She watched him spend 20 minutes teaching a scared 8-year-old how to make shadow puppets on the wall. She saw him comfort a teenage girl who was crying about losing her hair to chemotherapy. She witnessed him sitting with an elderly man whose grandson was in surgery, playing cards to help pass the anxious hours. The moment that had convinced Dr. Martinez to nominate Thomas for recognition came when she saw him working with Marcus, a 12-year-old boy, who had been in the hospital for 3 months. Marcus had become withdrawn and depressed, refusing to engage with medical staff. But during Thomas's rounds, she watched this same child light up, eagerly sharing details about his favorite video games and asking Thomas to help him write letters to his classmates. "Thomas," she had heard Marcus say one night, "you're not really a janitor, are you? You're like a superhero who uses cleaning supplies." Dr. Martinez had started documenting Thomas's impact systematically, and what she found was that this man had developed therapeutic techniques that rivaled those of trained counselors. He had an intuitive understanding of trauma, grief, and healing that medical professionals spent years learning. The manila envelope Thomas carried contained letters from patients and families spanning his 20-year career. Hundreds of thank-you notes from children who had found comfort in his presence, from parents who credited him with helping them survive the most difficult periods of their lives, from medical staff who considered him their most valuable colleague. A production assistant appeared at Thomas's side. "Mr. Williams, you're up in just a minute. Are you ready?" Thomas looked down at the envelope in his hands, which represented just a small fraction of the lives he had touched over 2 decades. "As ready as I can be," he said quietly. Even after 20 years of being told he made a difference, Thomas still struggled to understand why anyone would want to hear his story on national television. "Please welcome Thomas Williams," Ellen announced, and Thomas walked onto the stage to warm, sustained applause. The audience immediately sensed something special about this gentleman who moved with the quiet dignity of someone who had spent decades caring for others. Thomas carried himself with the understated confidence that comes from knowing your work matters, even when others might not understand its value. "Hi, Thomas," Ellen said warmly as they settled into the iconic white chairs. "Thank you so much for being here. I understand you work at St. Mary's Children's Hospital in Phoenix." "Yes, ma'am," Thomas replied, his voice carrying the calm steadiness of someone accustomed to speaking softly in hospitals. "I've been working the night shift there for 20 years, doing maintenance and cleaning." "But I also understand that you do a lot more than just cleaning," Ellen said, with a knowing smile. Thomas's face lit up with genuine surprise. "I just try to be helpful to the families and patients. The night shift can be lonely, especially for kids who are scared or families who are worried." Ellen leaned forward with interest. "Tell me what a typical night looks like for you." Thomas thought for a moment. "Well, officially I'm supposed to clean rooms, mop floors, empty trash, that sort of thing. But when you're working at night in a children's hospital, you see a lot of people who need more than clean rooms. You see kids who can't sleep because they're afraid, parents who haven't eaten in days because they won't leave their child's bedside, teenagers who feel like their whole world has changed because they're sick. The studio had grown quieter as the audience began to understand the depth of what Thomas was describing. "So what do you do for them?" Ellen asked gently. "Whatever they need," Thomas said simply. "Sometimes it's telling stories to help a scared kid fall asleep. Sometimes it's sitting with parents who need someone to listen while they worry about their child. Sometimes it's teaching a teenager card tricks to help them feel normal for a few minutes." Ellen was clearly moved by Thomas's matter-of-fact description of what amounted to intensive emotional support. "Thomas, you're describing the work of a counselor, a chaplain, a social worker, but you're officially a janitor. How did this become part of your job?" Thomas smiled softly. "I guess it happened gradually. When you see a crying child or a worried parent, you don't think about your job description, you just think about how you can help. After a while, I realized that cleaning wasn't really my job. Helping people heal was my job. I just happened to use cleaning supplies." Ellen felt tears beginning to form in her eyes. "I understand that the hospital administration has noticed your impact. Can you tell me about that?" Thomas looked genuinely surprised. "Dr. Martinez, our chief of staff, told me that patient satisfaction scores are higher during night shifts, and she thinks I have something to do with it. I find that hard to believe." "Why do you find it hard to believe?" "Because I'm not doing anything special," Thomas said with genuine humility. "I'm just treating people the way I'd want my own family to be treated if they were in the hospital. Everyone deserves to feel cared for when they're scared and vulnerable." Ellen stood up and moved to sit directly next to Thomas. "Thomas, what you're describing isn't common. Not everyone would spend their work time providing comfort to strangers. That comes from something special inside you." Thomas looked down at the envelope in his hands. "I brought some letters from families and patients. They help me remember why I love this job." "Would you share one with us?" Ellen asked gently. Thomas carefully pulled out a letter that was clearly well worn from being handled many times. "This one is from a mother named Jessica. Her 6-year-old daughter Emma was in our hospital for leukemia treatment 3 years ago." Thomas began to read. "Dear Thomas, I don't know if you remember us, but you changed our lives during the hardest month we've ever faced. When Emma couldn't sleep because she was afraid of the dark, you taught her how to make shapes with shadows on the wall. When I broke down crying in the hallway because I didn't know how to help my daughter, you sat with me and reminded me that love is the strongest medicine. When Emma lost her hair and felt ugly, you told her she looked like a beautiful alien princess from a planet where bald was the most beautiful way to be. Emma is in remission now, and she still practices making shadow puppets. You didn't just clean our room, Thomas. You cleaned away our fear and replaced it with hope." The studio was completely silent, except for the soft sounds of people crying. Ellen wiped her eyes, completely moved by the pure love and impact described in this mother's words. "Thomas," Ellen said, her voice thick with emotion, "do you understand what you've done for thousands of families over 20 years? You've been healing hearts while you were cleaning floors." Thomas nodded through his tears. "These families have given me so much more than I've given them. Every night, I get to be part of people's healing journeys. I get to see miracles happen. I get to witness the strongest love in the world, the love between parents and children facing impossible circumstances." Ellen turned to address the camera directly. "Ladies and gentlemen, this man has spent 20 years proving that the most important healing in hospitals doesn't always happen during surgery or through medication. Sometimes it happens through the simple act of one human being caring for another." The audience rose to their feet in spontaneous applause, recognizing that they were in the presence of someone who had dedicated his life to service in its purest form. Ellen looked back at Thomas. "What keeps you motivated to go above and beyond every single night?" The families, Thomas said without hesitation. When you see parents who would give anything to trade places with their sick child, when you see kids fighting battles that adults couldn't handle, you realize that offering comfort isn't going above and beyond. It's just being human. The episode aired exactly as it happened, becoming one of the most emotionally powerful segments in Ellen Show history. Within hours, their Angel Tom was trending worldwide as viewers shared their own stories of hospital workers who had provided comfort during difficult times, but the real impact came from the healthcare community itself. Thomas's story inspired hospital workers around the world to recognize the profound healing power of simple human kindness, leading to training programs that taught medical staff to incorporate emotional support into their daily interactions. 6 months later, Thomas returned to Ellen's show with an update that brought even more joy. St. Mary's Hospital had created the Thomas Williams Compassionate Care Program, training all staff members in the kind of patient support that Thomas had been providing for 20 years. The program had been adopted by 12 other hospitals. "Any thoughts about retiring from your night shift?" Ellen asked during the follow-up interview. "Not a chance," Thomas said with a bright smile. "I've got too many families to take care of, too many kids to tell stories to, too many parents who need someone to remind them that hope is always possible." Because sometimes the most profound healing happens not in operating rooms or through advanced medical procedures, but in the quiet moments when someone takes the time to see past a job description and respond to human need with human love. Thomas Williams had spent 20 years proving that the most powerful medicine is often the simplest, the medicine of presence, compassion, and the radical act of treating strangers like family. In a television studio that day, a janitor became a symbol of healing, and audiences around the world were reminded that sometimes the most important people in any institution are the ones whose names don't appear on diplomas, but whose hearts appear in every interaction they have with people who need care, comfort, and the assurance that they are not alone in their darkest hours.